Hey everyone, welcome back. Or if you're just joining us, welcome to KSSP Podcast. I'm Spencer.
I'm Katie.
And in this episode, we're going to be talking about inflation. So, what is inflation? Well, inflation is an increase in the general price level of goods and services in an economy.
And how is inflation measured? Well, the most well known indicator of inflation is the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, which measures the percentage change in the price of a basket of goods and services consumed by households. But the CPI does have its limits. Not included in the CPI are spending patterns of people living in rural, non metropolitan areas, those in farm households, people in the armed forces, and those in institutions such as prisons and mental hospitals. Another important factor to understand is that BLS bases the market baskets and pricing procedures for the CPIU and the CPIW populations on the experience of the relevant average household, not of any specific family or individual. For example, if you spend a larger than average share on your budget on medical expenses and the medical care costs are increasing more rapidly than the cost of other items in the CPI market basket, your personal rate of inflation may exceed the increase in the CPI. Conversely, if you heat your home with solar energy and fuel prices are rising more rapidly than other items, you may experience less inflation than the general population does. So you can think of CPI like a basket. What I put in my basket may not be the same thing you put in yours, or even if we put the same amounts of things in there, you may put more or less of the same thing I do. For example, the standard is one apple, so I only put one apple in my basket, but you put 10 apples in your basket, and the CPI won't accurately reflect you and your spending. So it's important to take into account you and your family needs that may be different compared to the standard family.
And we may be wondering now what causes inflation. So, the simple explanation is too much demand relative to supply. According to former Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke, inflation occurs when the aggregate quantity of goods demanded at any particular price level is rising more quickly than the aggregate quality of goods supplied at that price level. So, with inflation, there are three different types. There's supply shock or cost push inflation, and that is going to be major disruptions to an important economic input. There's money supply or demand pull inflation. Consumers who have more money to spend go out and spend. And then there's also expectations and spirals. And those are going to be unanticipated increase in money supply or unexpected increase in demand or decrease in supply. So inflation can be caused by different factors, but the big thing with inflation is supply does not meet demand.
So, is all inflation bad? Well, not necessarily. Most economists now believe that low, stable, and predictable inflation is good for the economy. If inflation is low and predictable, it's easier to capture in price adjustment contracts and interest rates, reducing its distortionary impact. Many economists, business people, and politicians maintain that moderate inflation levels are needed to drive consumption, assuming that higher levels of spending are crucial to economic growth. Others argue that inflation is less important and even a net drag on the economy. Rising prices make it harder to save money, driving individuals to engage in riskier investment strategies to increase or even maintain their wealth. Some claim that inflation benefits some businesses or individuals at the expense of others. Economists believe inflation is the result of an increase in the amount of money relative to the supply of available goods. So there are critics of both sides of the fence, some who think low inflation is necessary and others who would disagree.
And how do we fix high inflation? Well, currently one tool that is used is interest rates. So banks will raise interest rates, as we have seen recently, to try to sway people away from taking out loans. Which, sure, that might sound good in theory, but this prevents businesses from expanding and or sustaining, as well as preventing new businesses from starting up. You may wonder why or how this would help. Well, that's because their goal with this is to have a certain level of unemployment. Why? Well, in their eyes, the unemployed aren't making money, which means they aren't spending money, which in theory should help lower inflation.
Right. What about inflation and MMT? Deficits are not indicative of overspending. For evidence of overspending, look to inflation. We should use fiscal policy to address inflation, not interest rates and unemployment. Fiscal policy should be more focused on inflation rather than balancing the budget. And it should be more focused on balancing the economy with low inflation and true full employment and not the budget.
So, now that we've gone over a few different topics and how they fit or work with MMT, join us in our last video where we go over our thoughts on everything we've covered today. And you can also leave a comment on this video if you have any ideas for topics you would like us to discuss in future episodes.
Yeah, you can reach out to us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And we also occasionally do Twitch live streams, so check us out there.
And don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe and turn on notifications so that you know when we do. Otherwise, we will see you in the next video.